Camden showed up just after lunch, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a folded slip of paper in the other. He didn't knock, he never did anymore. Just strolled in like the place still belonged to him. "Fern's been slammed with last-minute stuff," he said, setting the coffee on my kitchen counter. I told her I'd drop this off. He handed me the paper, its edges soft, the handwriting familiar. It's the ceremony location. Changed from the invite, but still pretty close. She thought it'd be less of a circus. I looked down at the floral notepad, one of mine actually, and read the address twice. No church name, just a rural route and a number. "It's just a small change, Mom," he added, flashing the smile he used when he needed me to say yes. I nodded and set it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like an apple. "I've got my dress all ready," I said, smoothing my hands over the counter like it needed polishing. Lavender silk. Got it taken in at the shoulders. He didn't comment, just tapped the paper once and said, "Make sure you leave early. Fern wants guests seated by 4. That morning, I did everything slow and deliberate. Steamed the dress again, pinned my hair. Slipped on the heels I hadn't worn in years. I checked the fridge before I left, made sure the note was still there, and copied the address into my phone just in case. The cab driver picked me up at 10. I showed him the paper, and he gave it a long look. "There's nothing out there but old farmland," he said, squinting at the street name. "You sure this is right?" I was. I had to be. Camden had written it himself, so I told him to drive. The sun was already warming the asphalt as we pulled away from my quiet street and toward something that didn't feel right, but I hadn't let myself admit that yet. We passed the edge of town just before noon. The cab's radio buzzed between static and country songs I didn't recognize. Outside, the houses thinned into wide fields and scattered barns. I sat quiet in the back seat, palms folded over my purse, the slip of paper resting just beneath the clasp. By 1 o'clock, the pavement gave out. Gravel crunched under the tires, clouds of dust chasing behind us. We slowed at every bend, every fork in the road. No signs, no banners, no line of parked cars, just wheat wire fences and silence. I checked the address again, then again. The numbers hadn't changed, but nothing looked like a wedding. The driver finally pulled to the side and turned to me. "Ma'am, are you sure this is right?" My hands shook as I unfolded the note. "It's what my son gave me," I said, but the words felt thinner now. I reached for my phone and called Camden. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. My voice caught somewhere in my throat, tight and dry. It was almost 2 when I gave up. "Take me to the church," I told the driver. "The one in town, Fernanda, said something about a shuttle." He nodded without a word and turned the car around. When we reached the church, the parking lot was nearly empty. No floral arches, no ushers, no music drifting from an open door, just heat and concrete. I stepped out and looked around. A priest in plain robes was locking the chapel. "Excuse me," I said. "Is there a wedding here today?" He shook his head. "No ceremonies scheduled. Not today." The cab door creaked as I sank back inside. My dress was wrinkled damp at the waist. I pressed the note flat against my lap, then folded it once more, slower this time. Somewhere they were already seated. Somewhere a song was starting, but it wasn't here. The diner across the street was nearly empty, just an old couple in the corner and a teenager sweeping crumbs off the counter. I pushed the door open and stepped into the blast of stale air conditioning. My heels ached. My dress clung to my back. I bought a bottle of water with shaky fingers and sat in the booth farthest from the window. I stared at the label untouched, watching the condensation bead and run. The church was still visible through the glass, unchanged. Empty. I pulled out my phone again. The battery icon blinked red, but there was enough left for one more call. I scrolled past Camden's name straight to Fernanda. I hadn't called her before. We weren't close, never were. but I pressed the green button. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello, Fernanda, it's Marielle." A pause. Then carefully, "Mrs. Sloan, are you all right?" I cleared my throat. I was supposed to be at the wedding. Camden gave me an address, but I ended up miles out in farmland. "I just got back to town." Another pause. "Camden said you weren't feeling well," she said. "He told me you decided not to come." The lie landed heavy. Too smooth. Too prepared. I said nothing. Then her voice changed. Sharper now. "Where are you, Garrison's Diner?" "Across from the church." "I'm coming," she said. "Don't go anywhere." The line went dead. I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark window. My lipstick had faded. My bun was loose. The dress that had once made me feel proud now sagged with heat and disappointment. I didn't know what Fernanda would say. Maybe she'd defend him. Maybe she'd lie too. But something in her voice, tight, urgent, told me the surprise wasn't mine alone. 15 minutes later, her silver car pulled up, fast tires crunching the gravel. She stepped out still in curlers, her veil in the passenger seat. No smile, no greeting. She opened the door and nodded for me to get in. I did. Neither of us said anything until she turned the engine back on. Fernanda didn't drive far before pulling into an empty lot behind the church. She left the engine running, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly the rings pressed into her skin. Neither of us spoke for a while. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between us. Finally, she turned toward me. "Can I see what he gave you?" I reached into my purse and handed her the folded note. She smoothed it flat against the dashboard, reading the address once-twice. Her eyes darted over the handwriting. Camden's looping letters, the way he wrote his E's closed and narrow. She didn't need to ask if it was his. Her voice came out small. He said he wanted it quiet, that we'd invite only a few people he was close to. But he told me you didn't want to come. I didn't answer. She was already opening her purse, pulling out a tablet wrapped in a soft case. She tapped the screen and typed in a code without hesitation. For a moment, her reflection flickered across the glass, eyes-rimmed red lipstick half worn. The messages appeared in a list, one after another. Camden's name at the top. A conversation with a friend whose contact photo was a beer logo. If she's not there, no drama. Easier that way. Gave her some field address, lol. Fernanda's breath caught. She scrolled further down, scanning the timestamps. The last message was sent 3 days ago. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "He didn't even want you to see him get married," she said softly. He planned it. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Camden's name lit the screen. She let it ring out. We sat in silence again, the sound of a lawnmower echoing somewhere nearby. Fernanda closed the tablet and looked out through the windshield. "I need to go," she said finally. "Stay here. Please." Before I could respond, she put the car in gear and pulled out of the lot, her veil still tossed across the passenger seat beside me. Fernanda left me in the car with the tablet locked in my lap and a sick feeling in my chest. I didn't know what she was going to do, and I didn't want to imagine the weight of the moment she was walking into. But deep down, I hoped no. I knew she wouldn't let it slide. I waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. Long enough for the sun to shift across the windshield and my palms to dry against the leather case. At the venue, Fernanda stepped through the service entrance. She didn't speak as her bridesmaids fluttered around her, reapplying makeup, adjusting her veil. She let them tug and smooth and fix, but her eyes were somewhere else. When the music began, she stood straighter than she had all morning. She walked down the aisle with slow, even steps, but not to meet love. Camden stood beneath the archway, his posture, loose hands folded in front of him like nothing was wrong. He smiled when he saw her. Fernanda didn't smile back. The guests quieted as she reached the altar. The officiant began, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "Camden?" she said, her voice clear but not loud. Before we do anything else, I need you to tell me why your mother isn't here. Camden blinked. She said she didn't feel well. He said almost too casually. It was last minute. I didn't want to stress you out. Fernanda didn't move. She pulled the tablet from behind her bouquet and held it up. Then she read, "If she's not there, no drama. Easier that way." Gave her some field address LOL. The officiant lowered his binder. Someone in the crowd let out a quiet gasp. One of the bridesmaids looked away. Fernanda turned the screen for Camden to see. "You lied to both of us," she said. Camden opened his mouth, then closed it. The string quartet had stopped playing. The room felt frozen. Fernanda stepped back, placing the bouquet on a nearby chair, like it didn't belong in her hands anymore. Then she took a breath and turned to face the guests. Fernanda stood tall at the altar, the tablet still glowing in her hand. The whispers had started small at first, then rippling like wind through dry grass. A few guests had already begun glancing at each other, exchanging looks, waiting for someone to say it wasn't real. But she made it real. She turned to her sister and lifted her veil without ceremony. "Hold this," she said softly, handing it off like a piece of something that didn't belong to her anymore. Camden finally took a step forward. "Fern, come on. This is our wedding day. Can we just talk somewhere private?" "No," she said. "This is the place you chose to hide things. So this is where I'll leave them." She looked out at the crowd, family, co-workers, neighbors, half of whom had probably never spoken to me. "I won't marry someone who treats his own mother like an afterthought. I won't build a future on someone else's silence." Then, without another word, she walked. Past the altar, past Camden, past the rows of chairs with floral ribbon and perfectly placed fans. Her heels clicked down the aisle like punctuation, the kind no one expected at the end of a ceremony. Someone lifted a phone. I saw the small, trembling lens follow her all the way to the back doors. They opened wide. The music didn't resume. Camden didn't move. Outside, the sunlight hit her face like she hadn't felt it in hours. I was still standing near the valet stand, unsure of what I'd just heard echoing through the open doors. My purse was clutched tight in both hands, useless protection, but I held it anyway. Fernanda walked straight to me and pulled me into a hug before I could speak. It wasn't graceful or posed. It was fast, breathless, and shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know who she was apologizing for him herself the day, but I held her just the same." A valet brought her car around and we got in together. She drove without asking where I needed to go. That evening, I came home to a house that hadn't changed. The curtains were still half drawn, the lavender dress draped over the back of the chair where I'd tossed it. The fridge hummed steadily in the quiet. I didn't turn on any lights. Just sat for a while, holding a glass of water I never finished. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, the weight of the day pressed my eyes closed. He arrived the next morning just after 8. No knock, just the rattle of his old key in the door. Camden stood in the doorway, looking smaller than I remembered. His dress shirt was wrinkled. The corners of his eyes were drawn. But his face held no apology. He didn't mention Fernanda, or the guests, or the aisle she walked down alone. "I didn't think it would matter," he said finally, like he was explaining why he left a dish in the sink. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I only walked to the fridge and peeled the note from beneath the magnet, the one he'd handed me with that easy smile. It had a faint crease now, where I'd folded it too many times. I brought it to the kitchen table, laid it flat, and retrieved a pen from the drawer. "Sign the back," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Just sign your name, that you gave this to me. Why it's for me." He shrugged and signed his scrawl, uneven but legible. I waited for a question that never came. Then I folded the paper in thirds, walked to the file box in the hall closet, and slipped it into a folder marked simply May. I didn't need it for a lawyer or a judge. I needed it for the days ahead when the story might change, when the silence might twist things. He lingered in the doorway a moment longer, as if waiting to be invited in or forgiven. I didn't do either. I poured myself another glass of water and let the screen door close behind him as he stepped outside. The calls started 3 days later. Camden never left voicemails, just let the phone ring long enough for me to know he was still trying, then hung up. The texts came next. Short things. Half excuses wrapped in casual tone. Hope you're okay. Didn't mean for it to go like that. I thought I was protecting everyone. I answered when I had to. A yes or a no if he asked something direct. But I never invited him over. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't ask if he was sleeping all right or if his lease was up. Instead, I started walking early in the mornings before the heat pressed down too hard. Just around the neighborhood, past the empty school lot, the same oak tree I used to park under when Camden had soccer practice. Some mornings, I'd come back and pull weeds from the flower beds. Other days, I went straight to the library where I'd begun shelving books on Thursdays. Quiet work, measured, orderly. Camden stopped by once, but I didn't answer the door. I watched from the back room as he stood there a few minutes, then left something in the mailbox. It was a photograph from the wedding rehearsal, me and him and Fernanda, all three of us smiling, eyes forward. I tucked it away in a drawer. One afternoon, a message came to my inbox from an unfamiliar email address. I nearly deleted it before opening it. It was from Fernanda. Just one line. You raised someone who knows how to lose. I'm sorry it had to happen like this. I read it twice. Then again. There was no blame in it. No flourish. Just truth. The kind that rests quietly between what was said and what was never going to be. I didn't write back. I didn't forward it to Camden, but I printed it, folded it carefully, and placed it behind the sworn statement he'd signed, both filed together, not for memory, but for record, for proof that someone somewhere still saw what happened. The seasons changed without fanfare. August slipped into September then. October curled its fingers around the edges of the trees out front. I didn't mark time by the leaves, but by the silence each week a little quieter, each message from Camden a little farther apart. He moved back to the city after Thanksgiving. I heard it from Mrs. Halpern next door, who saw him packing a U-Haul late one night. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect him to. Friends stopped coming around. The groomsmen, the college buddies, even the manager from his firm names I used to hear, weekly disappeared into the spaces between updates. Camden's job, I was told, had shifted, reassigned, then reduced. It didn't surprise me. Oregon isn't a big state, not when it comes to stories, especially the kind whispered across boardrooms and barbershops. I didn't celebrate any of that. It wasn't triumph, it was distance, and that was enough. I started hosting Sunday brunches for 2 neighbor families, nothing elaborate. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee that brewed slowly while the children ran barefoot across the porch. We didn't talk about the wedding. No one asked. It was like it never happened, and in some ways, it hadn't. But one morning, after clearing the table and wiping down the counters, I opened the drawer where I kept my papers. The sworn note was still there, tucked neatly behind Fernanda's message, and beneath it the original slip, the one Camden gave me, with that false address, his handwriting still neat and curved, like he never meant to lie with it. The paper had held its shape. 3 folds. Crisp lines, ink still bold, like a thing frozen in time, untouched by the months that had passed. I didn't know why I hadn't thrown it away. Maybe it wasn't just about proof anymore. Maybe it was the last thing left of the version of him I used to know, the son who brought me handwritten notes, who smiled like the world was simple. I closed the drawer softly and turned back to the stove. A kettle had begun to hiss. The table only fits 3 chairs now. I'd moved one out to the shed weeks ago, not out of anger, but because it no longer served a purpose. It was one of those quiet decisions, a shift in the house that no one commented on, but everyone noticed. This morning, Clara brought over her grandson Micah. He's 5 and chatters with a kind of joy that fills up a kitchen faster than any centerpiece. I made pancakes and eggs, set out chipped mugs, and let the screen door swing open while the coffee steeped. The sun had already started to warm the windows by the time they arrived. There was no place card that read Camden. There hadn't been one in months. Clara didn't ask. She never did. She passed me a jar of jam, and we ate slowly the way people do when there's no rush to be anywhere else. Micah told a story about his school's fall carnival. I laughed at the part about the pumpkin rolling down the hill and nearly knocking over his teacher. Clara shook her head and poured more juice. There was no silence to fill. No apology waiting to be cracked open. After they left, I rinsed the plates and set them in the drying rack. Then I stepped out onto the porch. The rose bushes had bloomed again late, but bright. I trimmed the stems gently, placing 3 in a glass near the sink. Back at the table, I took the last piece of toast and chewed slowly. Not because I was sad, but because I wanted to taste every bite. I didn't wonder what Camden was doing now. I didn't check for messages or try to picture his apartment or imagine if he'd kept the photograph he once left in my mailbox. Instead, I wondered who he might have become if he'd chosen differently. Not for me, but for himself. And then I reached for my teacup, still warm, still steeping in the light of a home that no longer waited for anyone to return.